What would you tell people the one or two mistakes and traps to avoid going into best ball season?
Number one is do not succumb to the temptation to fill out your starting lineup. So you do, obviously you got a quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, and a tight end every single week. You do not need to feel the need to get through your first 8 picks and have the starting lineup filled. In fact, it's probably bad. Hayden Winks, our friend at Underdog Fantasy, has basically done all this research, way above my pay grade in terms of the math he's done. And every year the Best Ball Mania has happened, the same thing has come true, which is that the most effective strategy by the numbers is to have 4 wide receivers through 7 picks.
Mayo experience.
Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Mayo experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Underdog Fantasy. Code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now gets you a deposit bonus of up to $250, and you're probably going to want to do that if you have them, because not only do we have season-long pick'em, in-week pick'em, we got best ball drafts to talk about. Now, I am not one of these best ball draft bros. It's not really my scene. And I know a lot of you, necessarily big fans of the Pat Mayo Experience, are not either. You like instantaneous stuff you can do right away. You don't want to be sitting around for 45 minutes doing drafts, but I am going to be doing them. I might even start doing them with the PME community as well. We can draft against each other. It'll be a lot of fun. But I brought on Davis Mattek to walk me through the proper strategy for best ball going into 2024. What's worked in the past, what he's seeing happen so far trend-wise this year. And Davis, you have broken away on your own. You're like a bird soaring through the air. Where can everyone find your new best ball content for the year?
All of my best ball content you're going to be able to find 2 places: the YouTube channel, Davis_Mattek, youtube.com/Davis_Mattek, and then all of the premium stuff, rankings, in-season rankings, best ball rankings, written content, premium podcasts, all that can be found on patreon.com/DavisMattek for either $10 a month, or you can sign up for the year and it ends up being $8 a month. So pretty good deal if you do ask me.
All right, well, go do that. Support Davis in his new adventure. You're going to get a lot more best ball content from Davis than you're going to get from me. But I do want to talk about the ins and outs of what you're seeing so far this year. So besides stacking, I hear that's a pretty good strategy. Try to correlate the final week of the season. I hear that's a good strategy. Has that changed at all from the past few years?
I suppose depending on the contest that you are specifically referring to, there definitely is an argument with the way that Underdog structured Best Ball Mania this year that just making the final week is such a reward, where let's assume you max enter, so you do 150 entries in a Best Ball Mania 5. If you just get one team to the final week, you are going to have paid for your entire year. You get a minimum of $3,750 back for making the final round. So some people, our friends, Michael Leone, for example, have done some research indicating that if you could actually control for the scores of any given week, you might prefer to control for the scores in week 16 because advancing is so important. To be honest, though, Pat, that's not why I play the game. I play the game to try and win $1.5 million to get first place. So I am still pretty heavily tilted towards week 17, but I do grant that the math absolutely says the most important week for you to attempt to try and get the most points, actually, the EV, as the nerds would say, would be really slanted towards week 16.
Do you ever play anything that's plus EV, or do you just play?
I just play. I think I probably am plus EV in these best ball contests, but if there were to be one contest you'd want to be plus EV at, you wouldn't want to choose something that has a minimum of 650,000 entries, where the greatest best ball player alive, someone who could see the future. Even if I gave you the week 17 scores in advance, I had them for you right now, you still would not be able to guarantee yourself a profit. You still would not be able to guarantee yourself first place, because it's just, it is a game filled with massive variance. It's why we love it, and it's also why the operators love it, to be frank.
True. I did see that. I think it's like Seattle, Detroit, and Chicago. Don't all their schedules overlap towards the end of the season? So you could kind of go all in on some of those teams to try to correlate yourself that way?
Correct. Minnesota as well. It interacts, and all the NFC North teams, the way it plays out, the NFC North teams get obviously dome games because of Minnesota, and just the way the final 5 weeks of the season plays out. So I think our friend Ian Hartitz tweeted that out last week, where effectively there's a way to parlay basically these four teams who all play each other weeks 15, 16, and 17.
Yeah, it's Seattle, Green Bay, Minnesota, and Chicago. It's not Detroit.
There we go.
Yeah, because Detroit actually does have to, they're at Chicago and then at San Francisco, and they're at home against Buffalo. So they're not a part of it. It's the other three NFC North teams. Do you think is that a strategy you're going to deploy this season, or is that just like really advanced galaxy brain thinking?
I think that a lot of that stuff is probably on the margins. You could change the value of a given entry, or maybe of a subset of 20 entries or whatever. But the thing I'm most concentrated on is particularly early. Maybe it'll be a little bit different August 20th or whatever. But right now, June, July, I'm really just trying to win the ADP game. I think the earlier you're drafting, the more you should be focused on combinations that are not going to be possible later. So, you can take examples from the first day the contest opened, where you'd look at someone like, let's say, Dontavian Wicks, who's a huge riser, went from being like a 14th, 15th round pick. Now he goes in the 10th round most of the time. And there'll be a lot of other examples of this. Backup running backs once starters get injured. We actually, weirdly, as best ball has exploded in popularity, we've had relatively injury-free off seasons each of the last 2 years. We did have Cooper Kupp with the hamstring injury last year and Jonathan Taylor with the injury/holdout. But the year before, the only injury in the preseason of a guy who was even being drafted in the top 150 picks, Tim Patrick tore his, I can't remember if it was
Achilles.
ACL or Achilles that year. Sure. So he was really the only guy. And in my memory, that is not the way fantasy football works. There's like always a catastrophic injury in the preseason. In the first year the Best Ball Mania existed, Jerick McKinnon was a second-round pick for the 49ers for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then he tore his knee at minicamp, and obviously all those teams ended up being dead. But the backup running back stuff is one that I'm hammering a lot right now as well.
Yeah, and we saw this a little bit with Puka and Kyron Williams last year as they became risers towards like August and towards the actual season. We saw it with Puka. So I remember doing the shows with it. It's like, man, this Puka Nacua rookie guy keeps playing in all the 3 wide receiver sets for the Rams. Like even during their preseason games, he was running with the ones, and all of a sudden he started getting drafted where he was completely undrafted for the first 5-6 weeks of the season. So I would assume if you had Puka or Kyron last year, you probably did pretty well because those were late round picks that absolutely smashed for you.
Yes, getting ahead on 18th round guys who go from not being drafted to being drafted, even if they'd never rise that much higher than the 18th round. Think about it similar to a daily fantasy sports contest. There's a big difference between a guy who is 5% drafted and a guy who is 1% drafted. And in these contests, the discrepancy will be even larger. So let's take someone like, let's go Bucky Irving, backup running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Maybe the first 2 weeks of the contest, he was not being drafted every single time. Now Bucky Irving is probably being drafted. Actually, our friends over at ETR have estimates for this, but I'm going to guess he's being drafted about 85 to 90% of the time. So if you find the next Bucky Irving, the next guy who goes from being undrafted to being drafted all the time, you've created a huge wedge, a huge lever to pull versus all of your opponents in the elimination rounds. Because let's say your opponents completely nut out, but they don't have access to, backup running back X, but you have 15 backup running back X teams because you were taking him before the field. It's like creating an extra roster spot almost versus the field.
Would it make sense then to kind of divvy up the amount of drafts and entries that you put into a particular contest? If you can have 150 entries, would it be prudent to do a few drafts slightly before the NFL draft, slightly after, and then every month like kind of allocate 25, 30 or so drafts to that contest so you could potentially have a greater mix of these guys that are rising? Because if you put in 150 in May, you just might miss out on guys that are most obviously going to be drafted in August because we don't have that news yet.
Yeah, I mean, look, you would not be surprised to know that a lot of fantasy football versions already do this, and they have a name for it. They call it the barbell drafting strategy. Look, anytime someone in fantasy sports can be self-aggrandizing and compare themselves to Nassim Taleb, they're absolutely going to take the chance to do it. A lot of people basically right when the contest opens, before the NFL schedule is even out, right after the NFL draft, they'll rush and do, 15, 20, 30, 40 teams when the ADP values are so strong. Someone like Xavier Worthy in the pre-draft contest was right around in the 9th, 10th round, something like that. And then obviously gets drafted in the first round by the Chiefs, goes way up. But his ADP when the contest opened was based off of the pre-draft contest, so it wasn't as high. And then you take a break, you don't draft in June, maybe you don't draft that much in July, and then you end up drafting a ton in August when we have greater informational advantages. For my purposes, I mean, I basically just kind of stick on a bell curve in the sense of I'm just going to be drafting the entire time, and I let Underdog sort of take care of that for me. When Best Ball Mania is really the only contest open, that means I'll be drafting Best Ball Mania entries. But when there is a $5 contest, a $10 contest, maybe a $50 contest open, I'll just be drafting those instead. And those contests, a little bit different of a strategy because they are what we would call time boxed in the sense of all the teams are going to be drafted in a 10-day span. So you're not having to worry so much about the ADP game where someone who's drafting a month later is going to have an advantage over you because there will be no teams outside of that time frame.
I think that's probably what I'm going to do when I start doing some of these NFL drafts is that like pick a particular segment with a contest that either just opened or has a time frame attached to it that's probably not 150 entries. Maybe just do some of the smaller ones, maybe do a single entry, whatever it might be. I just feel like that's how I want to attack because I'm not going to sit there and draft 150 teams. Like, I don't have the time to draft 150 teams, and I don't think that I want to draft 150 teams. I know some people dig it. That's not really my speed. Like, I'm going to be doing a bunch of PGA drafts for the FedEx Cup playoffs. That's only 6 players per team. Like, that's far more manageable for me.
That's way more manageable, and like for someone like you, like that's just way more fun. It's not fun to feel like doing these drafts are a job. If you're not super into it, if you're not like, oh man, I can't wait to get another Drake May, Javon Baker team, then it's not gonna be that fun. And I think, I mean, the thing that I enjoy the most about best ball is that there are so many different approaches to it, and compared to DFS, compared to salary cap DFS, I mean, it's just not a solved game. Like we do not know what the right strategy is in these contests. I could not tell you definitively, like, oh, if you just do X, Y, and Z 150 times, you are for sure going to have plus EV rosters. I mean, I can guess, and I think we're mostly directionally accurate, but it is not solved at all.
Yeah, and like there are many different contests that you can try to enter right now. Like you said, Best Ball Mania 5 is up right now, 1.5 million to first place, $25 per entry. There is, the big dog at a $500 entry for the season. You have the Eliminator, which is $10 entry per season. Like there's just a lot of different styles of contests. So I would recommend that everyone go to Underdog, use code Mayo, by the way, get that juicy deposit bonus. That's extra money that you can play with for the season. So why not? And then try to figure out which contest is tailored to what you want to have throughout the course of the season. Like, do you want to be tracking and have the time to draft 150 teams? I'm going to guess the answer is no for most people, isn't it?
I think you'd really be surprised. Most people, once they get into, like, I have a lot of real life friends who don't have any interest in playing salary cap DFS. They're like, it's too hard. People just win too much. Like they have access to these tools that I don't have. I don't want to do it. And they definitely don't want to do the high stakes season long stuff. Like they have no interest in spending $2,000 on one fantasy team. But you get on the app, you deposit $500, you get your deposit bonus using promo code Mayo. And you're like, I don't know, man. I might as well get spending. And the ones that are available at the lower price point, like I would say of all of the virgin type stuff that I do in fantasy sports, the one that my like real life buddies are most interested in and played most frequently are these contests on Underdog.
Like I looking at the contests that are available right now, and obviously more are going to come. Like the Pitbull for me seems like the one that I want to play in. It's $20 per entry for the entire season. So you factor that out per week. It's like $10 or probably even less because it's a 10 max entry. It's 100K to first. Like that seems right along my wavelength for I want to do these drafts. I have fun doing the drafts, but if I feel like I have to put in 150, then it becomes kind of overwhelming to look at. If I have to do 10, I can knock out 2 a week or something like that. And I can do some content and I can have fun with that. And then I'm only in for $200 anyway in that contest. And I mean, I'm really just saving all my money for Pick'em every week anyway. So that's a way for me to get access, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so the problem that you would have is that there are a lot of sweaty nerds who are playing in these contests. So the $5, the $10, the $20, those don't stay open long enough for you to just do $2 a week, which is why Best Ball Mania or 2 drafts a week. That's why Best Ball Mania exists. It's really the only one that's going to be open. Well, I think Weekly Winners and Eliminators stays open a little bit longer, but yeah, Best Ball Mania is going to be open for 4 months, so you can do those as slow or as fast as you want.
Like the Pitbull right now is, I think, 75% full. I'll just wait till August when they open up another one.
They'll probably, well, I mean, I would bet they probably do like three or 4 of those. That's a really cool contest. You can only enter a maximum of 10 times, which I really enjoy. And the thing I like about the Pitbull is that 15-second clock, Pat. You just breeze through. I mean, that 15-second clock, like that's gonna take me. I already did 8 entries in that one. I think I did 6 of them on stream the day that it opened, because it opened on July 4th.
So yeah, if you want to walk through some of the drafts and see how, with Davis's commentary going through, I'm sure you're going to have guests going on. Davis_Mattek on YouTube is where you can find all of those streams. I'm probably not going to do those. I might do some golf ones because I find that they take relatively a quick amount of time. I did some of those for the major season ones, and I have fun with those. 6 picks, but 15 seconds per pick is very much in my wheelhouse. I can get on the treadmill and like incline walk for 20 minutes and bang out some drafts.
I mean, that is what I think the absolute secret of best ball is, which is that it has unlocked just infinite hours of cardio for me. I can get on the treadmill, I can get on the Stairmaster, I can go walk my dog, I can get in a draft, I can get in 2 drafts, and I can get my cardio in, I can get my 10,000 steps in a day, and I'm not bored at all. It is an absolute hack. I mean, obviously that's not going to be for everyone. A lot of other people have children and responsibilities in their lives. I mean, I have some responsibilities, but I don't have kids. So being able to just draft all summer, it actually gets to the point of when the season starts, when the NFL season starts, I get so bored doing my cardiovascular exercise because I'm like, what do I do? Where? Like, I don't know what to do with my hands when I'm doing this.
All 22, man. Monday mornings, just get in a big run and watch the All 22.
Well, normally what I do actually is I get on the Monday morning, I get on the Stairmaster and I knock out my thread. So I pull up all the routes and the snaps and everything on PFF, and I just do my big thread for every game. But I think I'm moving that behind the paywall this year, so I'm gonna have to be a little bit more locked in than just doing a thread.
Well, let's get back to top-end strategies. What would you say is your favorite strategy so far this season? And how much, let's start with this. How much of what you do in the draft, especially at the beginning, is dependent on which pick that you get?
It's almost 100% dependent on what pick you get. I would say if I really just had to distill it down in like a sentence, I would say I try to get 3 wide receivers in my first 5 picks that I think can finish in the top 15 of fantasy point scoring and 0.5 PPR on Underdog. And I really like to focus on getting either 1 elite quarterback or 1 elite tight end, sometimes even both. The thing that kind of casual drafters, I mean, Pat, when you go do a Best Ball Mania, the thing that is going to absolutely floor you compared to years past in fantasy football, you're going to be like, oh my God, there are so many wide receivers that go. Like, the 30th wide receiver goes off the board before the 14th running back. Like, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like what we have become accustomed to in the activity. So you really do not want to get behind the 8 ball at wide receiver.
Maybe, but when I see Drake London going at pick 14, I'm like, yeah, I can pass on that. Not a problem for me.
Well, I mean, just so not to get too specific player takey, but I happen to agree with you on Drake London. The one thing you will also notice is the 12th pick in 2024, absolutely brutal. I mean, there is a huge drop off from Bijan Robinson Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua to the next tier of guys. Could be Jahmyr Gibbs, could be Drake London, could be Marvin Harrison Jr. And furthermore, those people who start at 12, I mean, so often they are just going to take the two guys that are there by ADP, Jahmyr Gibbs and Drake London. I mean, I think there's a very small chance that that is the combination that you need to advance teams and to win Best Ball Mania 5. So a lot of what I'm doing when I get pick 12, again, this is kind of more inside baseball strategy, but just doing weird stuff like taking Nico Collins and Devontae Adams way ahead of ADP or things like that. But yes, a huge function of what you do with your 18 picks is going to be determined based on where you're drafting from.
So how many specific team stacks do you normally end up with by the time the draft is over?
Generally, at least, well, actually, I would say almost 100% frequency of 2. So that's going to include a quarterback with 2 of their pass catchers, probably one of their opponents from week 17. The Kansas City Chiefs get the Steelers, so you do Pickens or Roman Wilson or Pat Freiermuth. But really, you'd prefer to probably have 3, including 2. If you take a 2 quarterback team, you'd like to have them stacked probably multiple ways, and then probably a minimum of one of their week 17 opponents. And there are very easy ways to do this. You'll realize as you keep drafting that your opponents are also kind of helping shape this in ADP, where players who play each other in week 17, if they're kind of close to the turn, they'll end up, their ADPs actually are just right there because people are doing it so frequently. But I would say you really aim to have 2 quarterbacks, each with 2 of their teammates, and a minimum of one of their week 17 opponents at running back or wide receiver.
How many quarterbacks total do you end up with on your roster? Is it always 3?
Mostly 2, actually, mostly 2. Again, it's a little bit different earlier in the year because if you think about it, right now we are recording this early, so training camps have not convened yet. The round 17 and 18 picks, I mean, they're pretty up in the air. You look at it and you're like, man, I don't know if this guy's going to make the team. I don't know how much this guy is going to play. And then you look at the quarterbacks available in that round, you're like, Derek Carr is playing 17 games for the New Orleans Saints. There's really no universe where he's healthy, and that doesn't happen. You look at Aaron Rodgers. He's healthy. He's playing all these games. Bo Nix. If Bo Nix is healthy, he's playing 17 games for the Broncos. He'd have to be crazy bad to get benched for Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham. So there's a real argument that drafting early on, you'd want to do some more 3 quarterback teams. And the guys that I do 3 quarterback teams with are teams where I skip an elite quarterback. So, if I don't get Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts or Anthony Richardson, then I'm looking at Justin Herbert, Kirk Cousins, and one of these rookies. I think that's pretty viable. But if you spend, I think the right way to think of it is you think of each position as draft capital buckets: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. And if you have already filled your quarterback bucket up with Anthony Richardson, you probably don't want to overfill it with 3 quarterbacks. But if you just gave it a little smattering of Matt Stafford, you probably want to put some extra quarterback draft capital in there.
Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Supercharger, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. The best way to break this down, at least in my mind, if you're trying to allocate which tier quarterbacks are on and how they match up with and be able to see the Underdog ADP along with their projections at the same time, if you go to runthesims.com right now, the season-long projections are in there. You can customize them any way you want, and it's completely free. to use during the preseason. So you can go save your results, export your projections to wherever, upload them to wherever. You just need to put in your email at runthesims.com. I would highly recommend that you do that. And one of the things that I like to do, I normally do this for either season long, week one, salary cap, or even my like pick them, like to go through it, is try to enhance some players that I really like and try to see, because I remember doing this with Jamar Chase, year one with Jamar Chase. And it was like, hey, so we have like a medium projection. It's pretty like milk toast when you look at it. But like, hey, let's say he is an alpha from the get-go. What is his actual upside on this team if you give him like a 29% target share, which I think that we probably have him in as right now, year 3 or 4 into the league. But year 1, it wasn't really looking that way. Remember, there was like stuff around Jamar Chase going into the season, like, does he even like really like football? Is he even good at football? Do you remember that stuff?
It wasn't that he doesn't like football. It was even stupider than that. It was that he was having trouble
catching
the football without the white lines from the college football.
That worked out. Good take.
It's one of the dumb, and you know, you can laugh at it. Maybe you're listening to this and being like, that's not real. That didn't happen. I promise you I was there. I promise you I was drafting teams that year, and I promise you that the impact of those reports was 100% real. He slipped like 10, 15 picks from where he was going in a ton of drafts.
So you can kind of make a range of outcomes is what I'm saying. You can do all of this at runthesims.com is, hey, in a best case scenario season, let's punch in what you would think that he would do in terms of seeing targets, pace of play from each of the teams, and see how many fantasy points that player scores. And then you can kind of do the inverse of being like, all right, well, maybe this is more run heavy system. Maybe this player ends up like, I think a great team to do this with is the Packers. Now, overall, it's probably going to be pretty flat between all of them if they all stay healthy. But if you have a particular take on one of those guys, and maybe it's Romeo Doubs, who no one likes, but is just going to be on the field all the time, and be like, yeah, maybe he gets like 21% of the target share. Like, what does that start to look like? And then you can kind of assess their overall point projection versus where they're going. I always find that's the best way, especially later on in drafts, to try to find your steals.
I think you actually hit on like a pretty sharp strategy, which is that most of your opponents are going to be drafting off of median expectations. There are a lot of median projections you can find out there, but it's really helpful to think in your mind that you don't even have to, I mean, you should do the work. And I actually will just concur. I use Run the Sims for Showdown DFS, and I find the projections pretty easy, pretty malleable. Like I think it's pretty user friendly. And I think that's a great way to examine, you know, like go into the Cincinnati Bengals backfield and go, you know, Zach Moss, pretty terrible pass catcher. What does it look like if I scale him to 5% of the team's targets and I give Chase Brown 12%? What if I give Chase Brown Joe Mixon's old receiving role? What does that look like? How many points is that? Is that valuable? Is that useful on a 0.5 PPR site? I think those are great ways to exploit pockets. And, you know, I mean, I think you can also do drafts in a different way. You can be like, okay, in this draft, I'm going to draft like the Bengals, like Joe Burrow has an MVP season. Yeah, because I took Jamar Chase at 4.
That's what I like doing right there. It's like, hey,
yes.
I have conviction on these 3 guys that they're going to ball out this season. I'm going to get them. Does it make sense to pair the people I need to pair them with at their price to see what their actual upside is? Like if Joe Burrow has an MVP season, be like, yeah, Jamar Chase is going to be good. We already know that Jamar Chase is going to be good. But does that mean that T. Higgins absolutely balls out? Is it Chase Brown? Is it Zach Moss? Is it going to be, hell, who knows? Is it going to be Mike Gesicki or Tanner Hudson, whoever it might be? Can you allocate enough of your resources towards that at the price point to justify the upside? Because, I mean, it's no different than season-long fantasy football for me. When I'm drafting these teams, I'm only concerned about upside. If you go into it underneath the premise that you're not going to win anyway, which most people are not going to win, the $1.5 million, the only way to win it is to have the best possible team. So why are you even looking at median projections?
I think that's actually a phenomenal point, and people are far too wed to these median projections when they're drafting. You know, I think a great player like that would be like Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk is like a 4th, 5th round pick. He's the 30th wide receiver off the board. He's got a very strong median and mean projection because, you know, he should have about 27% of the targets from like a relatively talented quarterback and a relatively decent offense for the Jaguars. But what would you have to do for Christian Kirk to get him to be the guy that you absolutely need in fantasy football. You'd really have to massage that projection. You'd really have to diminish Brian Thomas Jr. You'd really have to diminish Evan Ingram. And I think that is a super helpful way to draft fantasy football teams. I mean, I think treating each draft kind of like it's its own individual universe is a really great way to create unique teams. Because the other pitfall you'll fall in is if you are drafting, say you draft 20 teams, 50 teams, 100 teams, you'll draft a lot of teams that are very similar because you'll be on the clock at pick 80. You'll be like, I don't like these 4 guys, but I do like this guy. And there's a real danger when you're drafting a bunch of teams. Like, you don't really want to have 100 of the same team because then the outcome of your season is going to be very binary.
So you prefer kind of diversifying your portfolio of players. I mean, I would guess it's probably when you're taking random dudes and you're, pulling the Pete Overs end, just scrolling the fuck down. Shout out to the Badge Bros as well. That you might want to switch up those players from time to time, not just take. I mean, I run into this trap in all sports that I do, especially like when I do the salary pick show with Tambo. It's like, because we're building lineups in rapid succession, trying to move on to the next one with a different core of players. Like when we're rounding out our $3,000 player or $5,100 running back, we always just kind of pick the same guy to keep it moving. You would not want to do that with 150 teams.
No, you would not. I mean, I am kind of adjusting my strategy a little bit this year. I was far too much of a take what the room gives you guy each of the last 2 years. Our friend Brian Hooper did an analysis of all the players who did 150 entries in Best Ball Mania 4. And I was not the nittiest player in the pool, but I was in the top 10% of nitty players in terms of drafting players very close to their average draft position, meaning I actually didn't have a lot of teams that look the same. So I advanced a good number of teams. I believe I advanced 22%, maybe 24% of my teams last year, but I didn't have any super unique teams. So the fate of my teams was kind of just up to randomness, and I didn't have any huge player stands. There were some guys I had none of, but there were not a ton of guys who I really liked that I had like on 35 or 40% of my teams. So something I am trying to do this year is take some larger stands and basically be like, the market is wrong about this player. The market does not understand X, Y, or Z about a few different players.
What's the best pick to get at the beginning?
5 for sure, because you can select Justin Jefferson, who was the number 1 overall pick. Let's think a year ago. Literally this time last year, Justin Jefferson, first pick off the board. I mean, him or Christian McCaffrey. There's absolutely nothing in his profile to suggest he's any different of a player. It's just that people are a little bit unsure about his quarterback play. I guess they are forgetting that Nick Mullins averaged over 20 fantasy points per game in his 3 starts for the Vikings last year. Nick Mullins had a 412 passing yard game. Nick Mullins. It's the offense of the Vikings is that same cheating West Coast Shanahan offense that just has layup after layup for the quarterbacks. So you can get Justin Jefferson. You get a great pick in round 2. Wide receiver you're really going to like. Maybe you're a big Saquon Barkley guy. You can take him. Sometimes you get Jonathan Taylor there if you're in a particularly wide receiver hungry room. And then you get a great pick in the 3rd round as well. You can take Devin Achane or Kyron Williams, legit candidates to score the most points at running back in 2024 in the 3rd round. I think it's unquestionable. 4 or 5 is definitely the best pick to get.
I hate to burst your bubble, but there is a 0% chance that Devin Achane ends up scoring the most fantasy points this season.
What odds will you give me that Devin Achane scores the most points? I would definitely be interested in taking that action.
100 to 1?
Sure, booked.
All right, well, we'll discuss terms off air.
Yeah, you determine how much money you want that for, but yeah, I'm definitely interested in that.
I don't see the path. They went out and drafted even more running backs.
Well, the path is he just has to stay healthy for 17 games. Now, if
when he averages 9 yards per rush and scores 4 touchdowns a game, sure, yeah, that's going to happen.
I mean, obviously what's going to happen with Achane is his efficiency is going to come back towards the middle. Right now he's averaging the most yards per carry in the NFL history. I don't think that will continue. If you're looking for a comp of a player like him who has succeeded for
Priest Holmes.
It's CJ2K. That's the comp of the hyper efficient runner who got very little volume, but was really effective in the volume he did get as a rookie, and also struggled with injuries. And then he had Chris Johnson had 2,300 scrimmage yards in year two. Yeah, they took Jalen Wright. I mean, I'm familiar with Jalen Wright. He's like a pretty mediocre running back, nothing like what A-Chain was in college. And his backfield mate is until Latavius Murray signs with the team, the oldest running back in the NFL. So I think Raheem Mostert is going to be great until he's not. Like, he's going to be a good NFL running back.
But he's probably going to score like 13 touchdowns this year.
His median projection would be really good. I mean, his median projection is awesome, but there are a lot of seasons where you take Raheem Mostert and he plays 5 games and he scores 3 touchdowns. And not to say that I'm not taking Mostert, because I think that backfield is so productive. Mostert finished, I believe, number 2 in Underdog fantasy points per game, and A-Chain finished 9 in points per game, even including the 2 games where he left early with injuries. So there's clearly plenty of fantasy points available in that backfield. And I think that A-Chain is just pretty clearly a bet on the spike weeks matter, because that's the other thing about best ball that is so different versus season long. Getting 11 points absolutely does not matter in any way, shape, or form. Like, drafting a guy whose worst week is 11 does absolutely nothing for you, does not help you make money, doesn't help you advance, doesn't do anything. What does matter is guys who can randomly give you 45 points, because those points don't go anywhere. Like, they still matter the whole way. So I think you want a lot of, in my opinion, you really want to have a lot of Devin A-Chain in best ball.
If you end up with the 5th pick and you get Justin Jefferson, so he is going as the ADP, the 5th pick right now. You have, Amon-Ra St. Brown going slightly after him, a pick after him, Jamar Chase going slightly before him. If you end up with Jefferson, do you have to have the Minnesota stack, or can you have Jefferson independent and still stack up who you want?
Yeah, you can. I think there's actually a great argument to be made that with a lot of these first-round wide receivers, so CeeDee Lamb with Dak Prescott, J.J. McCarthy, and Justin Jefferson, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I don't know if I believe this argument, but I definitely know it is an argument, which is, you want to talk about combinations are going to be insanely owned. Like, let's say Justin Jefferson has the season that I think he can have, that he leads the NFL in receiving yards again, that he scores 12 touchdowns. He's like the guy you needed to have in fantasy football in 2024. Well, beyond a shadow of a doubt, a huge chunk of those teams are going to have selected J.J. McCarthy. So even if J.J. McCarthy does not have that great of a season, he is going to be brought along to the elimination rounds just on the strength of how good Justin Jefferson was. So there's a real argument to be made. Well, on a Justin Jefferson team, you should take Jordan Love and Dontavian Wicks, or Jordan Love and Romeo Doubs, the week 17 opponent. You should take Lamar Jackson on a Justin Jefferson team, because Lamar is going to outscore J.J. McCarthy in any kind of week 17 projected scenario. And Justin Jefferson can have a great game completely independent of how many points J.J. McCarthy scores. Now, like I said, I don't know how much I believe in this argument, but I don't think that it is particularly mandatory because of the combinatorial ownership of those players.
How much have you seen what happens in best ball trickle into season long? I think last year was really the first year where I did notice it having a substantial impact, because no one is going to the ESPN lobby and doing mock drafts anymore for their season long league. Maybe they are, I don't know. But it seems like more people are using best ball as a prep to their 1 or 2 season long leagues. And a lot of the habits that they develop during best ball season is now trickling into it. So you see quarterbacks have started to go a little bit higher in season long leagues versus what we saw for 15 years previous. Wide receivers are now going super highly in season long leagues. Have you seen that sort of impact?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the number one thing that you will see is a real emphasis placed on stacking, whereas like 4 years ago, no one cared about this. Like, and I'm talking like your 12-team league with your buddies, or a high stakes league or anything, the ESPN mock draft lobbies. No one cared about making sure they got Dak Prescott when they took CeeDee Lamb, or if you took Patrick Mahomes, you didn't absolutely need to get one of his wide receivers later on. That's totally not the case now. Any format that you play in, everyone is going to be aware that you want to have quarterbacks correlated with their teammates. I mean, it's just a fact of the game now, which I think is, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that bleed over, but that's like the number one thing I've noticed.
It's really funny because for years, I mean, we just used to call it dub points, having Matt Ryan and Julio Jones or having Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens. It's just like, this is great. Every time McNabb throws a touchdown, T.O. catches it. We could just pile up points on the leaderboard. It's funny that it took like 10 years for that to actually become a thing, even in season long.
It is. I mean, and it's the most intuitive thing. Like everyone, when this became the forefront, the cutting edge, revolutionary fantasy sports, everyone's like, yeah, obviously that's the way it works. If you take Lamar Jackson, you really want Mark Andrews. So the weeks where Mark Andrews has a great game, you're getting dub points. I mean, to the point that any kind of pushback against it, that is that, I mean, obviously there's always going to be an old man yelling at clouds, particularly in fantasy football, which has a real staunch old guard. Remember that the old guard used to not be that into daily fantasy sports, and now daily fantasy sports is kind of like old hat. There's always going to be pushback, but I mean, it's so self-evident.
What are the best stacks that you should be targeting, do you think?
I think the best stacks are the ones that are really closely aligned in ADP. You'll see this all the time. Guys who are not that far away from each other. I think, honestly, if you told me, all right, you can do 150 teams in Best Ball Mania, you can choose your stack, you're going to get them every single time, I would choose Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. That would definitely be my number one. I think not only are they both like kind of favorites to lead their positions in scoring in any given week, but they also have teammates that correlate with later. They go in like nice pockets of the draft where there's not as much opportunity cost. Number two would be Mahomes and any of his wide receivers. So it could be Rashee Rice, could be Hollywood Brown, could be Xavier Worthy. I really like Nico Collins and CJ Stroud. I get that one a little bit less often personally because I am doing so much of these other two stacks. And I think an underrated one is Jordan Love and two of his guys. So Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, and then the two tight ends. I think that one is almost certainly underrated. Like that offense is just so efficient. I expect them to have a little bit higher of a pass volume this year, and they get the dome game in week 17, which is a big advantage.
Are there any ones that you're actively avoiding that seem to be popular at the top end?
I've got very little of Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid. It's like honestly, it's like a bit of a personal preference vibes thing. But I've got Jalen Hurts ranked above Josh Allen in my stuff that I draft off of, and I've got Andrews ranked like pretty significantly ahead of Kincaid. So I just don't get that pairing all that often. Now, do I wake up in a cold sweat sometimes thinking like, man, Josh Allen is like this unbelievably great fantasy football player. He could score 17 rushing touchdowns and just bury me, just like put me underneath a cliff. Dalton Kincaid, if Keon Coleman stinks, if Curtis Samuel gets injured, Dalton Kincaid could catch 100 passes and I'll feel so stupid. That's definitely one of them. Also, T. Higgins and Joe Burrow. I don't even feel, this is pretty bared out in the numbers, that Burrow is kind of your classic archetype of an overrated fantasy quarterback where he's very good in real life. I mean, he can throw a 4,500-yard, 38 touchdown season pretty much without breaking a sweat. But the combination of the lack of clarity around this wrist injury, like basically you ask any surgeon, you're well aware of all these fantasy doctors out there and you're going to get a different answer on what this wrist injury means. But really, he just does not run at all. And I don't like taking T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins is kind of an overrated player. So I just don't get a ton of that combo either.
The move is, I've been trying to convince Cust, because Cust is a doctor, to become a fantasy doctor. Because one thing I've noticed with a lot of these fantasy doctors, they're not actually like medical doctors. They're like doctors of history and things like this.
Yeah.
But they can put doctor in front of their name and give you medical advice.
Yeah, I don't look. It's that is one to be exploited. The other one is there's really only one guy who's like a fantasy lawyer. So if anyone wanted to step in, if any of you guys have a legal degree, your Juris Doctorate, that is a space that is could be exploited pretty easily.
Well, we need Siege to stop concentrating on darts, and he can get into that space.
Perfect. Yeah. If we can get Siege, I actually Siege should do that. I don't know why he's not giving his legal briefings on like every Rashi Rice update.
When do you think Rice comes back? Do you think he gets suspended at all?
I think the overwhelming evidence is either his suspension gets pushed to 2025 or it ends up being like a commissioner's thing where the league steps in and suspends him like 2 games or something. But they've been avoidant to that. The last couple years, the league has tried not to do that. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. Don't come to me for your advice.
Ask
but
Siege.
yeah, go ask Siege if you want a more clear legal update. But my reading of the situation is that if I had to price it, I would say it's like minus 110. He misses 2.5 games or less. And I think that means he's like a big value in fantasy drafts right now.
Yeah, right now Rashee Rice is going at pick number 68, wide receiver 40 in current best ball drafts. Who are the cheap stacks that you end up going, like the tertiary stack, the secondary stacks? Because I had identified 3 that I really like, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to deploy them. One is the Titan stack with Will Levis. The receivers are kind of expensive, but he's super cheap, and I think independently those receivers are probably going to be fine, playing in a pretty soft division. I think the Saints, who you brought up earlier with Derek Carr, you know he's going to play as long as he's healthy, and outside of Chris Olave, everyone is essentially free on the Saints right now. And then Washington. Like, I get that. I mean, you talked about Anthony Richardson, how he's one of the elite guys going. Like, why isn't Jaden Daniels considered to be up there with him?
No, I think you make a pretty great argument. I really like taking Jaden Daniels. I like the Titans one. If you're really kind of strapped at the end, you can do Levis and Chig. You could take Tyler Boyd with them if you want. I mean, I don't do a ton of that, but I do a little bit of Levis and Chig. The 2 that I'm most into right now, though, are the rookies. So Drake May and then all of his pass catchers, really other than Jalen Polk, are, last 2-round selections. And Bo Nix scored more rushing touchdowns in college than Jaden Daniels. I don't think he's going to run a ton, but I definitely think he's got upside to 4, 5, 6 rushing touchdowns as a rookie. And then I think it's a little bit understated just how great of a play caller Sean Payton has been in his NFL career. I mean, he got league average play out of Russell Wilson last year after Wilson looked so bad before. And with all Russell Wilson's just a weird guy. And Bo Nix is not a great quarterback. He's got no ceiling. He can't be Justin Herbert. He can't be, even Kirk Cousins. But can he replicate what 41-year-old Drew Brees with no rotator cuff was doing for the New Orleans Saints? Absolutely. And Sean Payton knows exactly how to draw those offenses up. And all of his pass catchers, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, whoever ends up playing tight end.
Even Cortland Sutton is pick number 91.
Yeah. It's not like Cortland Sutton's real expensive either. I mean, I'm not that into Cortland Sutton. I mostly just vibes based. He ran so hot in touchdowns last year. I don't know how much he can duplicate that. But sure, I mean, Cortland Sutton is I think, him and Jalen Polk are the 2 cheapest wide receiver ones in the pool, basically.
I had a lot of success last year, and people kind of laughed me out of the room. But who's laughing now was don't draft Kupp, draft Stafford because he was free, and then draft all the pass catchers around him. And that led me to Puka on some teams, and that really went a long way. And all I really needed from them, now Puka was like an every week guy that kept, rising to the top of my lineups because independently he was so good. But you need 3 or 4 weeks from this bottom end stack to really hit. And they can be shitty for 12 weeks. As long as they're good for 4 weeks, you should be good enough, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I probably wouldn't duplicate so much of that strategy, taking the quarterback of an elite guy without the elite guy. Although, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to think more about it. Maybe there are awesome combinatorial leverage reasons to do Stafford without Puka or Kupp or something like that. I would have to think about it, but I don't do it.
But last year it was Stafford was going so late because there was rumors that he wasn't even going to play last year. Although we all knew that he was going to play, because Matt Stafford going to retire, and Cooper Kupp was going in the first round. But every other Rams pass catcher I think was after pick 140. It was just a free stack. And like the Titans are a bit less of that because Ridley and Hopkins are going up so high. But like Bo Nix, who you just mentioned, is absolutely one of those guys. And like for example, this year, could you stack up Derek Carr without Chris Olave? I mean, that's not optimal, probably, but what if Chris Olave gets hurt, like Cooper Kupp did last year? And then you need like Shaheed, Jawan Johnson, A.T. Perry, and Derek Carr. Well, those could just be basically like 4 of your last 5 picks in the worst division in football.
No, Shaheed is a great pick. He goes pretty cheaply, but yeah, you skip Olave, Juwan Johnson, because he had this off-season surgery and it's unclear if he's going to be back, for training camp, week 1, wherever. He's like an 18th round pick now. A.T. Perry, Bub Means. Can't believe there's really a guy named Bub Means who's fantasy football relevant, but he is. Yeah, I think that this is a great year in fantasy football to do one of the high-end quarterbacks and then one of the guys who is like absolutely free. That's like kind of my favorite way to build teams right now. Like one of the 4 or 5 really elite quarterbacks, and then you wait, and you finish it. The one issue you find is the bye weeks are miserable. Lamar, Richardson, and Daniels, like the 3 like best running quarterbacks outside of the top 2, all have the same bye week, which is very annoying.
What would you tell people the 1 or 2 mistakes and traps to avoid going into best ball season?
Number 1 is do not succumb to the temptation to fill out your starting lineup. So you do, obviously you got a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a tight end every single week. You do not need to feel the need to get through your first 8 picks and have the starting lineup filled. In fact, it's probably bad. Hayden Winks, our friend at Underdog Fantasy, has basically done all this research, way above my pay grade in terms of the math he's done. And every year the Best Ball Mania has happened, the same thing has come true, which is that the most effective strategy by the numbers is to have 4 wide receivers through 7 picks, a minimum of 4, sometimes a 5th, kind of depending on the year, where the hips were and all that. Like you cannot get behind the 8 ball at wide receiver. So those are, and the other thing would be, there also is going to be the temptation to take too many running backs. Like you're going to be on the clock in the 3rd round and you're like, oh my God, Saquon Barkley in the 3rd round, I got to take him. But then you get to pick 9, pick 10, pick 11, and you're like, the best pick on the board for 5 consecutive rounds is going to be a running back. So you kind of just have to play that game properly.
All right. Anything else you want to add for people getting caught up on Underdog Football Best Ball for the year?
No, I mean, honestly, I think the number one thing is like, just have fun. Like it is an activity that rewards risk, and it is an activity that is structured to not pay off in this lifetime. Like the great stat is if you 150 maxed Best Ball Mania every single year, your median outcome, if you're an average drafter, would be to make the finals once every 8.3 iterations of the tournament. So once every 8 years. It's very hard to win, very hard to advance to the finals. So draft fun teams. Like if you think, like I do, Xavier Worthy is going to be the guy you need this year, take a bunch of Xavier Worthy. If you think the Cincinnati Bengals, like it's Joe Burrow MVP season, take Jamar Chase at pick 2. Take T. Higgins ahead of ADP. Take Joe Burrow ahead of ADP. Honestly, that is my best advice, is like have fun with it and create some fun stances.
Well, how often should you be doing that? So let's say you get pick 2, 3, whatever, mixing up who you take at pick 2 or 3, or even trying to reach on a few guys just because, you're in a tournament in a draft room with 11 other people, that if you take Jamar Chase at number 2, then the ADPs that you would normally see with your 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and pick probably wouldn't correlate a lot of the time to other Jamar Chase teams, wouldn't they?
Yes, the thing that gets a little bit risky is that what you're doing when you're taking a guy ahead of ADP at pick 3, like let's say you take Justin Jefferson at 3, which I have done, you are making a huge claim. Like you are really.
Why is that a huge claim to say that Justin Jefferson is going to score more fantasy points than Jamar Chase? I don't feel like that's a huge claim.
No, I don't. But you only get so many of those selections. Like you're only going. Let's say you do 150. You should only get 8.3% of the time you're going to have pick 3. every time you take Justin Jefferson instead of Tyreek or Jamar Chase, you have, fewer teams that are going to have those guys on them because you only have so many bullets, you only have so many times you are going to get that pick based on the normal distribution. It's a pretty big claim to say, I don't want to have any Tyreek Hill teams, potentially this season, or I don't want to have any Jamar Chase teams. Whereas correspondingly later in the draft, if you take Chase Brown every time over Rico Dowdle or over Gus Edwards, that doesn't matter as much. It's relative to the percentage of ADP that you were jumping. It's just much less important.
All right, that will do it on the Pat Mayo Experience Intro to Best Ball 2024 for NFL season. Code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now will get you a deposit bonus of up to $250, and just use those and enter some more drafts or play the season-long pick'em. But use the Run the Sims tools at runthesims.com, completely free with an email address to make your own projections built off the projections that are already up there. The easiest thing that you can do. Davis mentioned his YouTube channel. Obviously, he has the TakeCast audio podcast and Patreon. So give people the rundown of what they should be expecting from you both in the pre-football season and then during football season. Davis?
All right, every week on YouTube, I'm going to be live on Tuesdays and Thursdays for a long time, like 3, 4, 5 hours on each of those days, streaming all these drafts on Underdog. And then on the Patreon, you're going to get weekly articles, weekly premium podcasts, weekly updated to the rank, like basically everything that you need to draft good fantasy football teams this year. Then in season, same deal. We're going to have, kind of a high stakes focused waiver wire stuff, weekly strategy stuff. And then the YouTube channel is going to turn into some of the battle royale stuff, probably do a little bit of the golf and these other sports as well. Just kind of everything that's very Underdog centric over on the YouTube channel in season.
All right. You can follow me at ThePME on Twitter. Smash like and sub to the channel while you're here. We've already started our division previews, team by team. You can check those out on Mayo Media Network. And the season-long fantasy rankings with Chris Meany are already up as well for running backs and quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. Coming soon, all right? So a ton of football back on Mayo Media Network starting right now. So check it all out, okay? I'm Pat Mayo. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!